I can see there's so many people on here, Joe. Let's start. Let me, first of all, I know he doesn't need any introduction, but I'll do it anyway. He is an internationally best-selling author. He's written books like Becoming Supernatural. He started out life as a chiropractor and started getting interested in neuroscience and studied neuroscience and morphed into essentially a spiritual leader who has holds sellout events all over the world. And the best part of all, he's a really great pal of mine. So I am thrilled to say hi to Dr. Joe again.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you. I'm so excited to be with you. We have had so many great memories. I was thinking this morning that, God, I must know you for over 20 years now. It's got to be more than 20 years since we've known each other, and we have share so many great experiences and also really great information that we have in common. So I'm always happy to talk to you.
Absolutely. And thank you, Joe. And it's been 21 years. I know I met you when my book, The Field, had just come out. And that's been it. It's been connections ever since. And we've also shared some really nice wine too.
Of course.
Absolutely. And for people who don't know me, I'm Lynn McTaggart. I also written a number of internationally best-selling books, 4 of them on the new science since my book, The Field, and The Intention Experiment, The Bond, and my latest book, The Power of 8. I also do lectures and workshops around the world. And as I say, the other thing is Joe and I are both from New Jersey. We're both Italians, so we both like a good plate of Italian pasta too. So let's just start out, Joe. Why don't we tell people some of the things, people think we do exactly the same work, and it is, there's a lot of overlap. There's also a lot of differences too. So why don't you just kind of encapsulate what it is that really fascinates you the most?
Well, I honestly think, and I appreciate all the work that you've done from a journalistic standpoint, and bringing so much science into practical information for people to contemplate, and it's made easy. I think this is a time in history where it's not enough to know. I think it's a time in history to know how. And I think that science has become the contemporary language of mysticism. It's science that demystifies the mystical. And if we can, just like we both do, combine different fields of science that point the finger at possibility, whether it's quantum physics or neuroscience or neuroendocrinology or psychoneuroimmunology, all of these sciences are telling us that there's possibility. And people can build a model of understanding, but the important point now is the practical application of that knowledge, of that information, to do something with it. In other words, if you have a headache, do you take an aspirin, or do you actually apply some type of interchange to see how your mind can begin to affect your body in some way? And so my interest is to demystify that process so that people have within their reach all the tools to make measurable changes to their lives. And so in the last 10 years, my real prominent interest is to research to see if it's the truth. And, we've partnered with many universities now, and the data actually points to the fact that we are greater than we think, more powerful than we know, and more unlimited than we could ever dream. And I think what an amazing time in history where people all of a sudden realizing that a healthcare plan or a government or a religion may not be the solution for someone to take care of them, that it's a time that we really have to learn how to take care of ourselves.
That is a great encapsulation too. And I should say too, you're really, you've been fascinated by the unlimited nature of the brain. I mean, that's been something I've heard about for the years that I've known you. And I suppose if you were going to look at our similarities we started out researching, each of us in our own ways, and then came to the idea that we are more amazing than we've been told. I mean, I've been doing a lot of work in the power of intention, as you may know, and our extra human capacities that have been present in all of us, but diminished by authority figures, by our parents, our teachers, etc., who have told us, no, we aren't like that. We're essentially a bag um, of chemicals and electrical signaling. But I've discovered, as Joe has discovered, that we have amazing capacity to heal ourselves, heal others, heal the world, and create this in our lives. So I've been really interested in that. And also, I guess I've been interested in the effect of things outside ourselves. So I suppose my first foray into this was looking at the field, the fact that we are all connected by an invisible quantum field. And I suppose that exploration led me to, okay, now what? What can we do with this? And I suppose that's led me down the path of my big interest, which is group intention. Group intention in a large scale with all of the intention experiments I've done, but also in small groups and the power we have collectively. So it's that power outside ourselves as well as what Joe's talking about, that we have power collectively to heal ourselves, heal each other, heal the world. So Joe, let's talk a bit about expectation, because you've seen so much of this. I love that little saying, if you think you can do it, if you think you can't do it, you're right.
Yes.
And that kind of sums it up, really, your expectation. Tell me some of what you found about with the power or the limitation of expectation.
Well, I learned a lot about expectation when I was studying the placebo. It's amazing how you can give someone a sugar pill or a saline injection or perform some false surgery or treatment, and a certain percentage of those people will accept, believe, and surrender to the thought that it's actually the truth without analyzing it, that they're getting an actual real substance. And their body begins to manufacture the very pharmacy of chemicals that causes them to heal by thought alone. So the question is it the inert exogenous substance that's doing the healing, or is it the body's innate capacity to heal? So everybody has been conditioned to a certain degree, whether we like it or not, to rely on something outside of us to change our inner state. And so when a person's given a pill and it's blue on one side and red on the other, and they take it and they notice a change in their internal state. My pain has gone away, I'm sleeping better, whatever it is. And when they notice that change in their internal state, they pay attention to what caused it and they start to associate and condition. So well, if you keep doing that over and over again, that pill becomes a symbol of them to change their physiology. So if you take that pill and you replace it with something that's inert, and they see that pill, based on conditioning, when they take that pill, conditioning based on the past, they begin to expect that outcome to happen again. And the expectation of the outcome is simply marrying a possibility, an intention, a vision of a future outcome, a new possibility in the quantum field. And if the doctor's enthusiastic and you name the substance something that you can't pronounce and you charge a lot of money for it, and you use a name that rhymes with something that you could associate as a known, Niagara and Viagra, there's a strong correlation. It's a lot of flow. And so people are conditioned to expect an outcome. So when they start to expect the outcome, the marrying of that clear intention, if the person is optimistic, if the person is enthusiastic, if the person is grateful for the outcome, a combination of that clear intention combined with the elevated emotion begins to change the body's physiology for them to manufacture their own pharmacy of antidepressants, their own pharmacy of morphines or pain relievers, their own pharmacy of dopamine by thought alone. So the question is, do you need the exogenous substance to change your state of being, or can you change your state of being by thought alone? And by the same means, if you give a person a prognosis and you tell them that in the chemotherapy treatments, you are going to get really nauseous and sick. They've done research on this. 50% of the people on their drive to the chemotherapy treatment start to get nauseous in anticipation of the event taking place. So the question is, can 50% of the people get well on their drive to work, or they're on their drive to their doctor in anticipation of getting the right treatment? In your studies with the power of 8, if the person can assign meaning to the value of what they're doing, and they can see, oh my God, energy can actually inform matter. Okay, that sounds like something that makes sense. Give me the quantum understanding. And you get a collective group of people, and we're discovering that collective networks of observers determine reality. And you can get them in a very specific state, and the person who's receiving the healing understands the value of what's taking place, the expectation of what's about to happen. If they're in a state of gratitude, it's kind of an interesting thing. Gratitude, when we receive something, when we've just received something favorable, when something's happening to us that we really enjoy, or something just happened to us that surprises us, we feel gratitude. So the emotional signature of gratitude is something's happening to us, or something favorable just happened to it. It is the ultimate state that we receive in. So if the person's in that state of gratitude, then it makes sense then they're more susceptible to information, because we accept, believe, and surrender to information equal to our emotional state. So that can actually program the autonomic nervous system to begin to physiologically change. And that's exactly what Pavlov did with the salivating dogs. Just ring the bell and feed them a meal, and after a while, the anticipation of the event actually causes them to change their body's physiology. Their autonomic nervous system begins to change as if they're actually in the process of eating the meal. The anticipation is preparing for the event ahead of time, and we can use that to so many degrees in our favor.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just this, a lot of what you talked about, Joe, too, is, echoes what some scientists are looking at with the brain about the expectation effect, as they've called it. And they call the brain almost like a prediction mechanism, because it is predicting all the time what's going to happen based on trying to make sense of, that just stream of stimuli that we see in our everyday lives. So how do we make sense of it based on usually our past? If we think it's going to be a rainy day, a bad day, that's the way it's going to color our interpretation of the world. So it's very interesting, all of that. Now, what's fascinated me is the power of the group and new information about what that does. So there is a woman called Barbara Fredrickson who's done a lot of work on positive psychology. And she's discovered something really interesting about the vagus nerve. So you were talking about the autonomic nervous system. So there's this really long nerve in the body. It's called the vagus nerve, and it wanders through all the main organs of the body. And in fact, vagus is Latin for wandering. And so it wanders through all of the major organisms and organs of the body, and it affects them. It has involvement in our heart, our gut, all of those, our lungs, all of that. Now, what she's discovered is really amazing. She's discovered that the power of social connection, of connecting in small groups, of connecting with people, even having these, very tiny associations and love affairs, can affect the vagus nerve. And so what she's discovered is the more people have a kind of positive emotion of, for instance, altruism, and the more social connection they have, the higher their vagal tone. And vagal tone is really important because, in fact, it's essential for healing, because it changes the physiology of all of those mechanisms in the body, all of those organs. So what I've seen I've witnessed lots of miracles. So have you, Joe. And, I've watched, for instance, in the last year's master class, we had a couple of cancers reversed. And one of the most extraordinary was a woman called Diane, who had chemo. It didn't work. She had stage 4 lung cancer. She was due to she tried immunotherapy and didn't agree with her, couldn't do it. So then she was due for more chemotherapy, but she caught pneumonia. I mean, this was a very, very sad story. And it looked like there was no chance for her. Doctors didn't know what, they ran out of options for her. So all she had was her Power of 8 group. And they intended for, and her cancer disappeared. Her doctors were stunned in the next scan to find that her cancer was completely gone. And they gave her a no evidence of disease prognosis. And she's cleared. They're only just monitoring it. Now, my interpretation of that was, of course, power of intention. And it works its mystical way with individual bodies, with groups, with the world. But I also think there's something there in the social connection that is part of that alchemy. And that, I think, the idea of somebody having your back, somebody knowing that group of people who are strangers, who have your back, who connect with you, who are going to intend for you, essentially secular prayer for you, can be extraordinarily healing. So that's the thing that's interesting me at the moment, is just this extraordinary power of community.
Sure. And we've kind of played with this in our research, and it's really interesting because we use these very sophisticated random event generators in our room, in a ballroom. And a random event generator is like a coin toss, and this particular machine tosses a coin about 1,000 times in 1 second. So the more you toss a coin, the more it's going to be 50-50. So the random outcome of a coin toss is pretty much 50% heads, 50% tails. The more you do it, the more it kind of levels out. And what we discovered when we do our healings in groups, that the change in the random event generator is so clinically significant outside of normal that it suggests that random events are now becoming less random and more intentional. Now, the effect of that, of course, is a person's the people that are actually administering the healing with intention, they have to activate their energy to such a degree that when they give energy, the act of giving is the act of receiving. That person who's actually giving is giving something of themselves, and pro-social networks in the brain actually turn on for us to bond, to move closer together, to commune, to work as a collective. And the person who is receiving that energy, somehow there's a door that opens where they start to notice a change in their biology. And we see changes in inflammation and pain. We see changes in insomnia, like you, changes in all kinds of autoimmune diseases. Now, what's the significance of that? To me, it's the 4-minute mile. People who now all of a sudden witness that or are part of another person's healing. Let's just use that as an example. The feedback that the people that were in the Power of 8 group that helped to heal this person from cancer, that experience, knowing on some level that they contributed to that person's health, there's a level of empathy, a level of compassion that happens in the people that are administering it, where they can actually celebrate that person's healing. And the celebration of doing something for another person, when we receive the gratitude from that, that has the most profound effect of healing on the person who's actually doing the healing as well, because the experience, that new experience, is producing an emotion that is outside the known emotions that we typically feel. This level of joy, this level of empathy causes us for our hearts to open up more, which actually makes us better at doing it if we keep administering it. So I think that once that happens, and it's a possibility that becomes a reality. Consciousness is an awareness, and awareness is noticing and paying attention. The tribe, the collective now, is aware of another possibility. And that's so important in this time, that maybe there's more to reality than we know. And the effects that are being produced right now with so many people doing work like this, it's causing people to break from the conditioning of that they need something outside of them to change their internal state. Maybe we have all the biological and neurological machinery to do it, independent of something outside of us. And I think you and I both share that desire to demystify that process.
Absolutely. And as you say, Joe, now is the time. We need it more than ever. It's becoming much, much more compelling. One thing you touched upon is something that's really dear to me and that I've done a lot of research into, which is the power of altruism. I mean, in my book, The Bond, I looked at the idea, I was very interested in saying, and investigating, was Darwin right? Were we meant to be so competitive? Is that what the human spirit is really made of? And I found the answer was a resounding no, that actually we were born to belong. We were born to give and to take turns. We need to do this. And you see, and connection is really, really fundamental to the human experience, belonging and connection. They find that, there's so many studies showing that isolated people have up to a 3 times greater risk of heart attacks than people who are connected. And I also found that with looking into the power of altruism. Now, altruism, the evidence about altruism is overwhelming. It's like a bulletproof vest. People who do stuff for other people live longer, happier, healthier lives. And so what we see in our Power of 8 groups is an extraordinary rebound effect. We see it in our master classes and the classes that I teach, that the people you don't even have to be the receiver to be healed, because it is this fundamental act of giving that proves really strengthening and healing this need we have to be so connected. I saw a wonderful little line in an article I just read about our human need to belong, and it said that if we were in a zoo, it should have a sign that says, should not be housed in isolation. And I love that, because that's so true for all of us. And there's so many studies showing that when you do something for someone else, and think of it, a Power of 8 group intending for someone else is an ultimate altruistic act. You're not going to get anything back from it. You're just doing it for the sake of helping a stranger or somebody that you've only recently met. And that has been demonstrated, and it's been demonstrated in the studies we've done, showing that it creates major changes in the brain that are akin to a Buddhist monk during ecstatic prayer. I was so fascinated in the studies we've done to see that Power of 8 groups and group intention, the brain signature is nothing like meditation. It is much more like a Sufi master in doing chanting, or a Buddhist monk, as I say, in ecstatic prayer. It's a state of, essentially, it's a state of experiencing oneness. It's a mystical state of oneness. And it happens very, very rapidly. So I think there is something about that communal effect that just what Fredrickson has shown that causes these major, major changes in the body.
Yes, so we've spent the time when we do our healings, we've spent some time actually looking at what happens in the heart and the brain, because the altruistic act, the act of giving, is something that's innate in us when we're not living in survival, when we're not living in fear, we're not living in stress, when we're not living in anger or frustration or hostility or resentment or impatience or prejudice or whatever those emotions are that cause us to become aroused and alarmed in an emergency state. Those emotions actually divide us as a community. They cause us to focus more on ourselves and less on community. And I don't think that, science and psychology has always called them, normal human states of consciousness. I call them altered states of consciousness because when we're in stress, we're out of balance, and people spend a lot of their time in physiological imbalance. But that's not our true nature. Our true nature as a species is actually to cooperate, to collaborate, to connect, to commune. And when you get people in this state where they have an opportunity to give, and it's altruistic, and they actually want nothing material or don't want to be compensated anyway, but it was just the act of giving. When we give something, we actually increase our oxytocin levels. That's the side effect of giving. That oxytocin makes us feel more love. We open our heart, and oxytocin signals another chemical called nitric oxide. And nitric oxide signals another chemical to cause the arteries, the muscular lining around the arteries to the heart and in the heart and lungs to actually dilate and to expand. So we get this energy, we get this fullness in our heart from giving. And it is that act of giving that causes us to connect and to work together in community. And I think we're wired in so many ways to be that way. So when we get people together and we ask them to give life to another's life or to love another person into life, we train them to do this, and then we measure the effects between the heart and the brain. And when a person starts the process and they can really elevate their state and really move into that elevated emotion, the heart starts to beat in this really beautiful cadence. And we've seen this hundreds of times on brain scans and heart scans. The moment that happens, the heart in its rhythm begins to, and through the vagus nerve, send information to the brain. And there's this love affair that starts to take place between the heart and the brain. And the brain starts moving into these altered states of alpha. And of course, as you know, that state of alpha is a creative state. It's when we're less preoccupied with the environment. We're not analyzing or thinking about our body. The chatter that we hear in our head, the voice that's always talking to us, that default is kind of shut down. And we start to see in pictures and images, and we start suppressing our analytical mind, our thinking mind, our neocortex. We see this happen so many times. The person's heart actually fills with a very low frequency that actually looks like it increases as they do this. And here's the payoff. The parasympathetic nervous system kind of rises during this 15 or 20-minute period, which means now the body's moving into a state of relaxation. It's moving into that state of balance. But then all of a sudden we see this suppression in the parasympathetic nervous system, and all of a sudden we see this rising of the sympathetic nervous system. And there's a cadence that starts to take place between the heart and the brain where there starts to get to be a lot of order. There starts to be waves starting to carry waves, and we start to see this energy start to build in the brain. And much like a Buddhist monk, the person is completely relaxed and very awake. And they move into these beautiful, beautiful gamma brainwave patterns that is an arousal. And that arousal that they're feeling is not the arousal that they feel from fear when they're in survival, not anger when they're in survival, or frustration or pain. That's the arousal that typically happens that stimulates that sympathetic nervous system. This arousal tends to be more like ecstasy. This tends to be more like bliss. This tends to be more like love or connection. They feel really connected to something really amazing, and they're so relaxed and awake. They're so present and in the moment that somehow there's a door that opens in that elegant moment where information through the form of energy somehow informs matter in this wonderful way. And the cool part about it is it doesn't matter what you eat. It doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter the color of your skin. It doesn't matter where you're born. It doesn't even matter if you're sick or healthy, that when this occurs, the person who's doing this no longer feels like they need anything. There's a wholeness that takes place, that all of a sudden the person is no longer in lack or separation. They feel as if the connection that they're experiencing actually in that moment is having some type of effect. And that changes the outcomes dramatically. So if you can get a collective network of people with brain and heart coherence, we're learning that it's not the number of people or the amount of energy that's going to produce the most dramatic effects. It's the group that's the most coherent, that sends the strongest signal, that somehow collectively causes random events to become less random and more intentional. And there are some effects that are taking place in the three-dimensional world that we experience with our senses called matter. And the side effect is an upgrade in the person who's receiving the healing. But by the same means, many times the person who's administering the healing is actually having some type of biological change going on as well. And that's the cool part about it, because the celebration of what we just did in community then causes us to open our hearts a little bit more. We could actually get better at this the more we practice it. And I think that's important, because any skill is something that you practice over and over again.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the brain changes we see. So they're slightly different in that we've got different procedures, I'm sure. What we've found in our studies is slightly different in that parts of the brain essentially turn down. So specifically the parietal lobes, they sit right here, and they help us navigate through space. They tell us what's me and what's not me. And we find in Power of Eight groups, even with total novices, these get dialed way down. So do the parts of the brain, the right frontal lobes, for instance, that are involved with worry, doubt, negativity. They are dialed right down too. So this looks nothing like meditation. And that's what surprised me and the neuroscientists we worked with. We thought it would look just like meditation. It's very different. It's probably the communal element of it. But what ends up happening is the parts of the brain that make us feel separate, that make us feel anxious, they are dialed way down. And what is replacing them is a feeling of oneness. And for me, with the work and research we've done, I think in our Power of Eight groups, what is part and central to that healing mechanism is that state of oneness. We don't get to experience that too often. We don't get to experience anything else out there in the world most of the time other than a sense of separation. And we've essentially created a sense of separation in our world. We've created a me and a not me. Our brains do that too. For this time in a group, we get to experience what we really are, which is all connected, all part of this quantum field. A lot of people talk about entering the field, but we're in the field. We're already there. We're part of it. Our subatomic particles are doing a dance. Mine and Joe's are doing a dance, aside from our verbal dance too. So we see that. But you've talked also about how it changes. You know, it can change the atmosphere and things like that. One of the things that I've really been working on is how it changes social interaction, how it changes people's lives, not just their health, but their lives. So what I've been doing in my intention experiments deliberately is bringing together polarized people. So Republicans and Democrats. We did an intention experiment right before the inauguration to try to lower violence after the January 6th thing and the storming of the Capitol. And so I brought together Republicans, Democrats, I had a former jihadist, I had police, African Americans, all of those polarized groups, because I've seen over and over again, when people do an intention as a group, and Joe, you were so right in saying it doesn't matter the size. Doesn't matter the size. We've had the same effects when we do intention experiments with 100 people as we do with 25,000. It doesn't matter what it needs to be as a group. But what seems to happen also is the heart leaps across the fence. And I've seen this over and over again with intentions between Israelis and Arabs, intentions between Republicans and Democrats, intentions between Arabs and Americans on the anniversary of 9/11. We did one last September. And we brought Arabs and Americans together, and there was love being sent back and forth between these, and forgiveness between these different groups. So what's been really fascinating for me is seeing how the act of group intention changes everything, essentially. It changes your perspective. And when we do intention experiments, typically we see about 40% of people have some healing in their lives, whether that is relationships, physical healings, we get about 40%, because I survey people all the time. So we get that kind of effect, and we see that kind of effect, but we also see the effect of change in people's lives. I was fascinated with one of our Power of Eight members with my master class this year. CJ was going through a divorce and terrified. And she had been offered too little money and mediation. This had been going on for 2 years. And she joined the master class just for a little bit of support. And what ended up happening, thanks to her group, is she went through what she had been terrified to do, which was to go through the 4-day divorce trial, sailed through it, ended up getting 50% more money than she thought she was going to, found a job, found a new life, is getting along better with her children, healed a shoulder problem, which healed 50% faster than it was supposed to, twice as fast, and went on to have a completely altered life. And now she's so happy, so filled with joy that she giggles sometimes spontaneously when just talking to people. So what I'm trying to describe is the extraordinary power of small communities, small groups, to heal other aspects of your life. And that this is something that you talked about before, Joe, that this is the time for us to understand a new version of ourselves, adopt a new story. And I think something that's central to it is this small community for healing in various aspects of our lives.
So what will you be doing with your master class when you teach? What do you teach in your master class?
Well, I go through intention boot camp, as I like to call it, where I really go deep and teach people how to use it in various aspects of their lives, and overcoming negativity, dealing with it with relationships, and also the various keys to intention mastery that I've found with my studies, with the other people's studies, with our intention experiments work, and what doesn't work. We've learned and refined it over time. And of course, we put people in groups, and we keep them in groups for the whole year of the master class. And I have all kinds of clinics, periodic clinics, to work with people and mentor them through the years. So we stay with it. And that is really what's central to the work that I do, is carrying people with me, but also making sure they stay in a group, because the key that I found to healing is the long-term involvement in groups. But Joe, you were talking about now is the time. Now is the time, and we really do need to do things differently, and we can take advantage of some of this. What's going on with you? What are you looking forward to?
We have been studying for the last 2 years what happens when people have this moment of oneness, this moment of connection. And we've done a lot of real-time brain scans during this elegant moment. And the arousal that takes place in people's autonomic nervous system, the amount of gamma that's produced in that part of the brain. And think of the autonomic nervous system as the automatic nervous system. It controls and coordinates all other systems. And stress is really autonomic dysregulation. When we're under stress and we're living in survival and we can't control or predict, or we have the perception of something that's getting worse in our life, and the arousal of those hormones actually cause us to heighten our senses and become materialists and narrow our focus on the material world. That's when we start experiencing the most amount of separation. So how do we then get things done, or how do we create things in the state? Well, we try to control and force outcomes. We fight for them. We compete. We manipulate, because in a sense, in our separation, we're matter trying to change matter. And in the Newtonian world of three-dimensional reality, in the plane of demonstration of doing, you got to do something, and everything that we do to create takes time. So we have been studying the process of teaching people how to do the exact opposite, to go from a narrow focus on the material world, on objects and things in their body and people and all the knowns in their life that they associate with, to actually doing the opposite, to broadening their focus and putting their attention on energy and information, on nothing, and on emptiness. And the act of doing this, somehow, where you place your attention, where you place your energy, begins to slow down brain function to that alpha state, and ultimately down to this level of theta. Now, theta is kind of a hypnotic state. It's when we're the most suggestible to information. Theta is when you accept information, when you believe information, when you surrender to information as the truth without actually analyzing it. And this is how you can condition and program people to do anything. I'll just say it that way. So in theta, the person is actually, the body's in a light state of sleep, but their mind still is somewhat conscious and awake. And that's the door between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. We see our data suggests that lights go out in the entire neocortex, the person's mechanism that plugs them into three-dimensional reality, their autobiographical self, their repository of all the things they've learned and experienced in their life, their personality somehow. When in theta, when lights go out there and they can stay conscious while they're in their subconscious mind, and they're suggestible to information, but their eyes are closed and they're in a meditation, and they're not eating or tasting or moving and experiencing, if they can really learn how to put their attention on energy instead of matter, a lot of people hook up, a lot of people connect. And when we see them connect, as I said, the autonomic nervous system goes into such a state of gamma that it's, well, 3 standard deviations outside of normal in science is 2% of the population, and that's really, really, really good. Someone who has really good eyesight compared to the normal. We're seeing 200, 300, 400, 500 standard deviations in gamma outside of normal, and the subjective experience that that person is having is a transcendental moment of oneness, pure love, connection, whatever you call that, bliss, ecstasy. And we see these patterns over and over again so much now in real time that we can actually predict when it's going to happen. We can induce it. And at this point now, we're able to replicate it. And so what we've been doing is we've been drawing the blood, the plasma of those people who have this profound connection right after their experience, and then 24 hours later. And we're working with the University of California in San Diego, and we're measuring thousands of metabolites, downward causations of their interaction of frequency and energy, and frequency carries information. So if you're not getting information from your senses, you got to be getting information from somewhere else. And the more coherent the brain and the heart is, there's just this kind of entrainment that causes all of a sudden latent systems in the brain to become activated. And we wanted to see when a person experienced that level of wholeness, that level of oneness, if there would be new information in the blood. And so what we did is, during COVID, is we we took the blood of advanced meditators who had these transcendental moments, and we built a pseudovirus, a virus that behaves exactly like the SARS virus. And we took out the nucleus of the virus and we put in a dye. So if we exposed plasma to the SARS virus, the spikes would just enter the cell, and when they enter the cell, they would turn the cells bright red. And so we looked at controls, people who were staying at the hotel that were spouses of the people who had come. They were drinking Mai Tais at the pool. They weren't participating in the event. And we took their plasma before and after a week-long event. And when we subjected the pseudovirus to their plasma, they all got infected, which makes sense. Then we had a portion of people that were novice meditators. They kind of meditated, but they were just new to the work, and they really had just started getting going, and they were only meditating for a few months, and it wasn't consistent. And we looked at their blood at the beginning of the week long, and we measured it at the end of the week long, and we exposed it to the pseudovirus. And at the end of the week long event, we saw a resistance to the virus entering the cell, but we still saw some viral activity in the cell. The cells still turned red. So, okay, let's take let's look at the advanced meditators, and we looked primarily at the ones that hit this moment of oneness. And when we subjected the pseudovirus to the plasma of the advanced meditators, none of the virus would infect the cell. And the scientists that were doing the experiments ran the studies, and I'm not kidding you, more than 5 times, because they couldn't believe what they were seeing. There was an enormous immunity to the virus. So then we thought, okay, let's look at it under the electron microscope. So we got an electron microscope and we looked at it, we did the same experiment, and lo and behold, you see all these fuzzy patches hanging outside the cell and wouldn't enter the cell. So scientists are not going to stop there. So then we said, okay, we got to figure out what this is. So then we heated the plasma of the advanced meditators, and when we heated the plasma, all of the cells got infected. So when you heat proteins are like a crumpled up piece of paper. And when you heat them, they break down and they become inactive. And so we knew then that there was some protein that was actually causing this mechanism to take place. So then we took the plasma and we centrifuged it with this really, really, really high-powered centrifuge to create sedimentation of density of different liquids and solids. And the sediments, because of different densities, we know it's there. And so we found this one layer that was mostly proteins, and we did an assay on them, and we fished out the proteins, and we found this very specific protein that seemed to be the very mechanism that stopped the SARS from entering the cell. In fact, when we subjected it to a Delta variant and a few other variants, we saw the same resistance in the cell. And this particular protein, then, we took out of the advanced meditator's blood, and we actually put it in the controls that were infected, and all the controls that were infected became uninfected. So now we're scratching our heads saying, okay, what is the mechanism? So we found this particular protein. It's called serpin A5, and it has dramatic effects on the immune system. It has dramatic effects on cancer, on Alzheimer's, and our research actually shows that when we took the plasma of advanced meditators and we put it in uterine cancer cells, the mitochondrial function of the cancer cells exposed to the advanced meditators plasma reduced by 70%. Now, the mitochondrial cells are the energy centers of the cells. These are lungs. These are the energy packets of the cell. So it took the wind out of the sails of cancer cells, and then we did the same thing with a neuron that was that neurological tissue, and it downregulated the gene for Alzheimer's. And so, in some way, the interaction of energy and feeling connection and taking a bite of oneness somehow produces this tremendous immunity from our environment. And so we're just beginning the studies, and we're looking a little bit deeper. We're publishing a paper. And God, I keep telling the scientists, I can't believe this is the truth. You know, I just can't believe what we're discovering. And people confront me now that are colleagues and scientists and say, are you saying that meditation actually can prevent you from getting COVID. And I say, actually, I'm not saying that at all. The data is actually saying that. I'm not the person that's saying that. And I think then, why is this so fundamentally important? It's so important because when people become aware of that we have a really, really great pharmacy within us, and that we can actually regulate and control our response to the environment. In other words, for most people on a daily basis, your reaction to an email, your reaction to the news, your reaction to your ex, your reaction to the weather, actually your reaction, actually your response from some thought or some condition in your environment actually weakens the organism. And you keep doing that over time, chronically, you'll be more susceptible to the environment. So our hypothesis is, well, gosh, if a person begins to interact with energy and frequency, and there is that type of order or that type of connection, then it means then on some level we have the innate capacity to be more resistant to all kinds of conditions and all kinds of things in our environment. And so we're super excited about the studies. Of course, we have a lot more to do, we noticed also that cancer cells that people would, in a remote location, if they had the ability to focus on those cancer cells and hope for the greatest good of those cancer cells, we saw the same reduction, not to the same degree, remotely, in those cancer cells. And we were doing that because we wanted to take out the placebo component of it, just to see if biological tissue actually responds. And the crazy part about it is the temperature and the regulator of the incubator where the cells were actually went down a half a degree. And that regulator is such a specific regulator that controls temperature that during the whole entire time, during the experiment, it stayed down that half a degree. Somehow there was a fluctuation in energy that transcended the regulation of a machine. So we're starting to see all these phenomenological things taking place when collective networks of observers get together and begin to affect reality. So that's a little bit about what I've been doing.
Oh, brilliant, Joe. And wow, what a study. That is so fantastic. And I think what we're both saying really is that, first of all, we have so much untapped human capacity that the idea that we can heal ourselves and each other isn't fantastical. You're demonstrating it, I'm demonstrating it. And I wanted to just talk also about how we can heal whole societies. As I mentioned, one of the big things that I've been looking at is polarized communities. And I wondered why, after doing some of my intention experiments, and for those of you who don't know, I run intention experiments with teams of scientists, different scientists each time, so that we can't be considered using them for bias. And we set up controlled experiments. And we've done everything from trying to make seeds grow faster, to purifying water, to lowering violence in war-torn area, to healing somebody of PTSD and beyond. And we've run 40 since I started in 2007. And 35 have shown measurable, positive, mostly significant effects. So like what Joe is discovering with his various studies too, we're discovering that this ability, the use of intention, the use of meditation, these extra human capacities can do extraordinary things within our own bodies, but also out there in the world. So one of the most amazing things that I worked on, that I talked about earlier, was a study where we were trying to lower violence in Jerusalem, and I had people from 8 different locations in Arab countries. Part of this, and it was almost like a super Zoom call, in that we had cameras in 9 different locations. So 8 of them were with Arabs in various Arab cities, and the 9th camera was with an audience of Israeli Jews. And these were people who had trouble even connecting before. When I tried to bring the Arabs and the Israelis together just to set up the experiment. They were barely speaking. And by the end, they were sending love to each other, saying, your God is my God, etc. The experience of just connecting together and doing an intention together changed that whole social dynamic, changed that enmity. And I see it with the intention experiments and also Power of Eight groups, where not only are people healed physically, but things about their lives begin to heal too. One of my, I mean, I have so many fascinating stories. We've got thousands of them, but I love that even being part of a small group intention or a larger one can open up people's hearts. So I had a woman called Joy whose intention with her Power of Eight group when she joined my masterclass was to open up her heart to love. So they do an intention, her Power of Eight group, they keep doing it. And all of a sudden, I kid you not, she gets a call out of nowhere from a boyfriend of hers from 35 years ago. They start corresponding. They fall in love all over again. He's in the UK. She's in Australia. He ends up moving to Australia. They're madly in love. You know, geezer love, as my friend calls it. But they're connected. And we see this loads of times where there is this kind of energy and frequency changes that you talk about, Joe, we see can happen in all kinds of aspects of people's lives. So that suddenly we had a guy called Tom Speckman. They wanted to set up an alternative clinic in Mexico. And they had been encountering all kinds of roadblocks. And with the group's intention, suddenly all those roadblocks collapsed and they were able to do it so easily. So what we're really saying to you all is you have capacities that you haven't even touched yet. That we, as you say, Joe, that you said in the beginning, we think that we need external forces to, and we even think we need new mechanisms, AI and other things to upgrade us. We don't. We have all this upgrading inside ourselves, and we just need a variety of techniques, whether it's meditation, it's Power of Eight group intention, or whatever, to unleash them.